我觉得她今天很漂亮啊。
哎呀，你话佢唔靚啊？
咁樣睇啊，
太過分啦！
我骂他关你们什么事？你们是什么狗东西？
他们是我朋友，他们说的也是我想说的。我觉得我现在很漂亮，我也很喜欢我现在这个样子。你要是不喜欢看的话，你可以走开。
嘿嘿嘿嘿嘿，你知不知道你在跟谁说话？
我在跟你说话，你是个没有人情味的老板娘。
他妈的！哎呀，你个大货！你造反了你以为自己是谁呀？我就是我是阿梅。我告诉你妈去！
阿妹，
好嘢！
阿妹啊，其實我哋玩啊，就唔好怪我哋啊。
你話嗰個姿勢咧，其實係好靚㗎。係啊係啊係。
真的吗？我觉得我今天特别不像以前的阿美。
是啊，现在的阿美已经是一个很自信的女孩子。
跟你说一件事情。
什么？
我喜欢你。
我也喜欢你啊。
那我们之间是爱情吗？
你是开玩笑吧？
我是认真问你的，真的。
那当然不是爱情。我们永远都是好朋友。那不是更好吗？
没什么。
Why is nobody on the stream? Why is there nobody? Nobody on the stream.
你以后也常常来找我，鞋子破了，我还可以帮你补。
不会的，鞋子破了我就把它扔掉。我们都要向前看嘛。我永远都不要再穿破鞋子。不要这样子。干嘛？你哭了？不要这样子嘛。
Man, I hate this sort of social. Oh. Oh. Oh man. No. Okay.
我明白，谢谢你。
来来来，我们大家一块喝酒吧！来来来，干杯！
夜晚呢場，我哋就打入決賽。決賽，但係千祈唔好輕敵。輕敵。
我哋玉面雙飛龍並唔係話浪得虛名嘅，想入決賽問過我哋先。
有冇咁快啊？要威也啊，就係嘛？早晨，
早晨，嚟過嚟坐。啊，你個死仔真係一世好命啊！咁都俾你揾對好嘢啊！喂，其實你啲咩鐵圖公啊、心口碎大石啊，大笪地嘢嚟嘅啫嚇，咁都可以打球場嘅，好嘢。嗱，閒話少説啦，決賽嗰日唔好打，全隊過晒嚟。喂，呢次唔係空頭支票啦。你可以 cash 咗先簽合約㗎。
咁大筆數目，真係打跛腳都談唔晒啊！
梗係啦，我同你一世人兩兄弟啊嘛。
多謝晒我，雄哥。不過我話受唔起喎。
咩意思啊？你讓我怕你啊！喂，我見你隊波幾有噱頭，想大家一齊做大佢啫喎。做人啊，心胸廣闊啲，向前看，唔好咁記仇 ，OK？
哥，其實我真係冇記仇， 生一仔唔生性，所有嘅嘢都係自己攞嚟嘅。
你喺度扮嘢啊？喂，我睇通晒你噶啦，你會唔貪？
真係俾你睇通晒，唔單止係我哋成隊波都貪，不過唔係你呢張支票，全國冠軍，球場見。
阿妹，
死咗啦！
佢點死㗎？
俾我打死㗎！
我唔信，阿梅武功咁好，憑你打死佢，佢一定係死得好冤枉嘅。
咁你想點啊？
我要同佢報仇。
傻啦，講下笑啫。佢未死，不過佢唔喺度做㗎啦。
點解啊？
話明我哋呢度係甜在心饅頭㗎嘛。呢個傻女唔知點解突然之間整咗饅頭又苦又鹹，搞到冇晒生意啊！我都係被逼炒佢嘅咋。
又苦又鹹。
係啊，呢個大廈貴姓啊？揾佢咩事啊？
冇事。
夠鐘開波啦！今日諗住贏幾多球呢？嚇？
要贏咪一定要入波嘅。我仲有啲更激嘅波。 過啲日新又真係咁勁。仲有球證、旁證、足協、足總、宿委，全部都係我嘅人，點同我打？
呢款界外球點做球證啊你？強豪，你架打波打人㗎？
我係打人啊！你吹啊！我就要打到你隊人好似隻跛我一樣殘廢、殘廢、殘廢！吹我頭！
唔好意思咁多位，我要唞唞啊！唔緊要嘅，你個人行開咗啫，精神永遠都會喺翻度。
上半場打到半死啦，下半場打咩啊？收皮啦！你下半場打乜嘢啊？
冇嘢睇㗎啦，使唔使我因落去跳翻拍舞頂住啊？
跳舞都唔輪到你跳啦，係我跳。七七叉，七七叉，七七叉，七七叉，七七叉。
班仆街！
你梗唔想踢頂啦？邊個？有冇人見到？ 夠膽喺我面前打啊！哎呀，我嘅大你啊！我都夠矛啦，佢仲矛過我。
估唔到我鐵頭功一世英名，林老子俾人做到爆光。
豈有此理！我一早預咗強龍會出蠱惑嘅，細官會玩到咁盡嘅啫。魔鬼隊冇咁犀利嘅，肯定係拍咗心，或者係食咗藥嘅咧。快啲報警拉人啦！唔理佢食咗咩都好，我哋都要盡力踢埋落去，最後我哋會贏啊！
呢幾個鐘啊，我要救火啊！喂，對唔住我媽突然間早產，我一定要翻去幫手。叫你阿媽遲先早產，場波踢到一半你點走得嘅啫？邊係踢波嘅啫，攞命嘅！
喂，唔係，我當我求下你，喂，你唔好走喂！
我求翻你，你唔好求我，你俾我走得唔好
啊！喂！
冷靜啲，冷靜啲，冷靜啲！冇錯，你講得好啱。無論任何情況，我哋都要打完呢一場比賽。因為得翻8個人，如果仲有任何人受傷離場嘅，呢場波我哋就輸咗。我哋就殺人射球，我哋一定要頂住。你點頂啊？你頂一球，我頂3球啊！就你頂咩？哎呀！你教冷靜啲，冷靜啲，冷靜啲，睇球。
唔知我頂唔頂到咯。
頂得住啊！頂得住！
喂，我真啊，
點解啊？
係啊，呢20年嚟，我有句說話一直想同你講，其實我愛你。
Yes, somebody was watching a movie. Hi. EORX.
What are you watching?
Shaolin Soccer, but I'm not even watching it on screen because like there's nobody there. So okay, I'm sorry. So that I'm just actually waiting for people to come. Although I suppose you could watch it, but the thing is, I'm not actually intending to stream. Like that's not my purpose. So I'm here to make a very explicit message that I perhaps haven't done before. And I realize that before I've been made perhaps hypocritical in as much as people who held beliefs that I considered immoral, but that were still friendly to me, I was excessively friendly to them. And to the contrary, I was perhaps too unfriendly to people who were nasty to me without being worse in other respects. And so therefore, I'm trying to bring this to a sort of more neutral level. And this is why I'm telling all my viewers here. So firstly, that, yeah, I don't intend to stream regularly anymore, at least as long as I'm on my own like this. Oh man, my hair looks really like shit. You can really see the balding here. Anyway, so with that being said, so are you still here or not? Because this is really what I need. is I need to be able to like
Hey, I'm
say
listening
this.
to you.
Okay, good. So I don't really remember that much about
Not
you.
caring about your hair.
Yeah, no, well, not about you, but then when people see this later on, I mean, it really looks shitty. But anyway, it's more about like other people that might see the like, you know, I don't care about other people caring that much anyway, but it's just kind of anyway. I think look, I don't remember what we, you know, in the past what we talked about, but here's the thing. I think pretty much everyone I've ever met, I mean, there's never anybody I've met that I would consider either properly rational or properly moral, since to be properly moral, you have to be properly rational. And as such, everybody I know is both irrational and immoral. So, and in stronger words, that would mean both foolish or even idiotic, and which I kind of use as synonyms, and also bad or evil. And that would include you, though I don't actually have in mind any specific instances. So this is just something I want to make clear. And because even like there might be occasionally someone who isn't like that, but it's just so rare that I just, you know, how there's this innocent until proven guilty. Well, in this case, I would say I should have the opposite attitude of guilty until proven innocent, but because I don't know for sure, I still have to show also quite a bit of restraint. And so that's why I intend to really adopt a more sort of cool attitude, perhaps like that one, like the attitude of, say, a judge faced with a convict, or rather a suspect that is almost certain to be guilty. So that is what I intend to do. And so I'm just making this clear. I'm just making it clear with you, since you happen to be here. It could be anyone. So in a way, it is kind of, it's not entirely not personal, but it's not entirely, it just that it applies to everyone. And as such, also, I'm trying to make it clear that even though I act quite cordial, or again, you could see me like as a doctor, right? I'm cordial, but ultimately there's a distance here. And
well, I don't know about establishing logic. Looked into Gödel. His dad warned not to go down that way.
Yeah, the famous impossibility theorem. Yeah. Well, the point is that there still is, I believe that there still is a certain degree of objective rationality, even if there's like some sort of theorem that proves that like theorems are possible or something. But basically, ignoring that there is a sort of a general kind of rationality and irrationality, and obviously, if you like delve too far, then sort of everything maybe falls apart. But that doesn't mean that it's completely valueless either. So with that being said, also I want to make it clear that the people here, including you, and again, this is just because you're here, but including you, the people here are not my friends. I'm really, the whole reason I've been doing this is simply to try to achieve an impact. Obviously, with my limited viewership, that is not happening. And as such, again, even though I'm cordial, and I even act sort of like as if they were sort of my buddies or something, that is not the case. I'm here out of, you could say, self-interest, but with ultimately a greater interest, but it's a much more abstract greater interest than just sort of, you know, having friendly interactions with people on my stream. So okay, so I'm quite pleased.
At the _Nathan_L, what happens if you take off the headphones?
What happens is that I don't hear anything that's going on. Well, except I don't need to hear at this point because there's no audio. Before I was listening to my movie, and unfortunately, I just cannot figure out how to get the speakers on the computer to work. I've been trying that, but for some reason it's just not working. So my headphones are my only audio source, audio output for me. but like I wouldn't hear on the speech chat either. Of course, I don't need to hear you, but it's true that then I wouldn't notice when you actually write something if I'm not looking.
I can't get my computer to work right either. That's fine.
Right. So yeah, just letting you know. Okay, this is like I've said, I ultimately have a very how should I say, a very negative view of people in general. Again, both on stream, online, elsewhere, and in real life. And as such, I think, and it's been really hard. Like for instance, with my family too, I've been trying to do this, just sort of because there's nobody that I truly consider worthy. I have to create a distance, and it's really hard because there's all these expectations about you being friendly, like especially to your family. And again, when you're interacting in real life with people, it's hard to not be, or even not in real life, but when you're interacting directly with people as on chat, it's hard to not be. So this is just what I'm saying. I'm doing this only out of a desire to.
Well, I need
achieve more
other
impact.
people, so I respect them.
I guess psychologically I would benefit from contact with other people that I could truly feel close with, but unfortunately, I've never encountered such a person, and as a result, that's what I'm noticing, is that ultimately I don't actually particularly benefit. I mean, part of me, I'm always like I feel that there's still that need, and I feel that I get like partly psychologically satisfied even just by the interactions that I get on stream. But ultimately, what I realize is that it's partly I shouldn't, because like I say, at the same time it kind of goes against my principles, and at the same time I know that it's partly unhealthy, because at the same time there's this pain precisely of feeling this kind of affinity to someone who ultimately I shouldn't be, and I feel that I can't ultimately, so that there's this feeling both intellectually and emotionally that it's not right. So that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm establishing. That's what I mean by keeping my word, because basically it's referring to
I have felt like
video.
I needed to be perfect and a world historical figure, and if I didn't do that, I failed.
Really? So you felt really? Have you? Well, that's basically what I'm sort of trying to do. I don't really like. Yes, I always tended to feel that I needed to be better than everyone just to be on the same level somehow. Like somehow before I used to think that people were like inherently superior. And I realized that was due to, in fact, largely due to what you'd remember this, their soul crud, which makes them tend to be much more conformist, but very instinctively. So they're much more easily able to be, to follow the rules and to sort of be what one expects you to be. And so I realized that is why I felt like that. But ultimately, I realized that that's not a good thing. That's actually a result of crud, like I say. So it's actually a flaw of that, a flaw that's kind of attached to your soul. Again, presumably, I don't know for sure. And so as a result, now I see the opposite, but only intellectually. So intellectually now I realize it's the opposite, is that the others are actually kind of essentially like that, inferior to me, without wanting to be boastful about it either. I mean, it's just that I just happen to luck into this, so there isn't really merit about it either. So it's not something to be arrogant about for me. But it's nice to feel like that. It's nice to feel that actually it turns out that maybe I have sort of, in a sense, more innate worth, which is the opposite of. I mean, partly I kind of did feel it, I guess, already, but partly I also felt the opposite, and I still kind of partly feel the opposite. So yeah. So anyway, this is what I have been trying to do, and so it's very satisfactory now. So thank you for this. And again, it pains me to do this, because I know it's kind of hurtful. It's hurtful for others maybe to hear it. Maybe even if not you, it could be hurtful. And it's also kind of hurtful for me, because I know that then other people will be upset at me. And of course, I have this sort of presumably implanted by the Gorth, this sort of emotional issue, which makes me tend to feel pain at that kind of thing. So to say it out clearly, okay, presumably, again, I don't even know, I can't even
I have
recall
had some
specifically.
similar worries and
So just to say it, just to have said it, I'm gonna say it in the harshest way possible.
I
Presumably,
don't know you, but I am listening.
you don't know. Well, no, I remember your username. You're not the person that has come on the most often, so I don't remember as much. I don't really remember anything about you. I just know that I've seen your username before. But I'm just gonna say presumably. It would be nice, in fact, to do this with somebody who I actually recall having like specific discussions about. Presumably, you are an evil idiot, and I'm not your friend. Okay. Now, so now I've said it. Now maybe let's try to ascertain that, so I can actually say it with knowing something in particular. So, but at least the thing is that with you, actually, it seems like that's probably less the case based on sort of the stuff you're saying. But in any case, in many ways, I have more affinity with the people who come on here than I do with most people. Obviously, because that's probably why people come here, right? Because they feel a certain affinity in certain ways, right? And so that's why it's also painful to do this. But it feels like this is what I have to do. It feels like this is how I have to do. So let's look into it. How about a particular policy? Like my policy, I don't know if you recall, is the universal state. So I want to have a single state everywhere that enables people to just have freedom of movement. That's one thing. Another thing is a basic income for everybody, just to ensure that nobody's in
Well,
extreme
maybe
poverty.
I am an evil idiot and not your friend, but I am here because I want to talk to you and I mean you no harm.
Okay, so thank you for acknowledging what I said. That way it really feels like it actually, penetrated, so it feels like I've actually done this. That being said, I mean, it's
Sorry,
always...
don't mean to interrupt.
No, well, don't be sorry. I mean, I'm the one who sort of basically insulted you in a way, although it wasn't meant to be insulting. It's meant to be simply descriptive, but in terms that are quite harsh, right? I am so too. It's just that like I've said, I consider, but only thanks to a long maturation process that has occurred, although based on a sort of innate propensity to that, I consider that I've probably become at this point the least idiotic and least evil person on Earth, probably, because if anyone else had achieved such a level, we would be hearing that person. That person would also have come on stream, and we would be hearing that person say the things that I'm saying, and so that's why I'm assuming this. So basically, I wouldn't say that I'm not entirely not idiotic, and I wouldn't say that I'm not entirely not evil. It's just that I am the least of those things, right? So in that sense, there's still a kind of solidarity with those who are more evil and more idiotic. In fact, I've noticed that lots of the stuff I used to believe in was wrong, and even stuff very recently, I've been changing my thoughts, my beliefs a lot over even just the past few months and the past few years. And so I very much understand that it's not possible to be perfectly rational and perfectly moral. But I guess it's just that to me, it just feels very natural. And of course, yeah, it's obviously we have a tendency to be...
I know a lot about why sometimes things don't show up on TV or go viral, and it doesn't have to do with being true.
Yeah. I'm not. So you mean with Well, okay, so you could say that. Okay, well, the thing is that the politics streaming is pretty narrow, right? So if somebody else had the same ideas as me, we would probably have seen that person, except if that person hadn't been streaming maybe at the same times as me. But I'm pretty sure that somebody would have said like, "Hey, Nathan, somebody else has been saying the exact same things as you," and yet nobody has had that. So you could say that one of the reasons nobody has done this is simply because they know that they're not going to reach a broad audience, which is why I hadn't done it for a long time either, right? And of course, the reason I did it is because I figured that the Gorth actually now wanted me to succeed. And now I still do, but now I think it's going to make me want to succeed in a different way and not just through Twitch. And I'm still waiting for that to happen. And but yeah, this is why it's painful, because I do experience actually psychological satisfaction of having people that are actually willing to talk to me and discuss ideas that most people would just reject outright, including like my family members, you know. So in some way, that's the thing, is that even though often they'll have like ideological beliefs that I will disagree with, in a way they're actually more tolerant than almost anyone I know in real life. And so that's also why it's kind of hard for me to say things that are a bit harsh like that to my viewers here. But I think it still needs to be said. I think it still needs to be said, because I think otherwise it would be hypocritical.
I am too shy to stream.
You're too shy to stream. Yeah, see, people think I'm shy, or at least people used to think I'm shy.
So
I mean, no, don't be sorry. But I mean, if you're going to be sorry about actual bad things. Like I said, I'm presuming that you probably there are probably some bad things about you that I have no idea what they are. But I mean, tell me that way I can actually do it. That's actually really what I want, because I'm doing this as a sort of, I feel like it's a sort of ending of my development process, and this is why I'm doing this now. It's sort of, I have to feel like I've been developing my theory, and that involves me also changing myself in my behavior towards people. And this is why I'm doing that now. I feel like I've developed most of my theory that I've been doing over the past few years, and now it's time for the action, so to speak. Although again, for that to actually work, some things are going to have to I'm going to have to meet people who in real life who are going to be able to make that action happen, presumably. And I'm kind of still expecting that to happen, although it would be miraculous. But again, I believe in the Gorth, and the Gorth can make miracles happen, or just, you know, very unlikely coincidences happen. So I'm still kind of expecting that to happen. Since, of course, I mean, I expect, you know, the Gorth to have big plans for me. I mean, this is like, the Gorth is my equivalent of God for other people, right? So, and I don't know if you realize this, but yeah, or if I've made this clear, but I'm sort of like the quote chosen one, the quote, you know, savior, messiah, whatever. Presumably, I get the impression that that is the case. So I'm presuming that that is the case, which again sounds very boastful, but we'll see. We'll see. I mean, if I start getting really successful, then that can, you know, eventually be shown to have been true. But obviously, for now, we're just waiting. We're just waiting. But I do think that it does seem like if it's anyone, it's going to be me. So, can you? So I can actually say this again in a way that I actually have something to criticize about you. Can you tell me something about yourself that I would dislike? Tell me something that would make me have a critical opinion of you, especially in terms of morality, or in second place in terms of rationality. Can you do that? Can you like say something that, you know, a belief of yours that I would consider immoral, that I would consider evil, or can you do that? Or else something that I would consider foolish, like some belief that I would just consider ridiculous, at least, or like it's like actually wrong. Oh no, are you still here? Are you still here? Because otherwise, I'm kind of done with this. I'm just.
I want
now.
you to know I'm hearing you out. I think you should take a rest, and I'm not gonna.
Oh no, why? Come on, just
join
do it.
Your religion.
Oh, join your. Well, again, I don't consider it a religion. It's again, it's just, to me, it's like a science more, in the sense it's just trying to figure out rationally what is actually going on. There's no conversion. It's just about basically, if you're rational, if you're rational enough, you would recognize that this,
crossing the is/ought divide for me is religion.
Well, and what do you mean by that exactly? I mean, I know that some people say that what is ought to be, and other people say what ought to be is, and I recognize that to be a fallacy. I know it's a typical, for instance, it's a sort of typically, quote, right-wing thing to consider that what is ought to be, right? That's a sort of the naturalistic fallacy. Something exists, therefore it ought to be. And then the sort of typically left-wing thing to do is the opposite, right? Something ought to be, therefore it is, right? So like this sort of, there shouldn't be differences at all between races or something in terms of like ability, like, and so therefore because it ought to be like that, therefore it is. So those are these two sort of opposites that you have, but I don't do that. I'm not doing a fallacy like that. I'm not saying that something that ought to be is, nor am I saying that something that is ought to be. Right. What I am doing is that I do think that there are objective ought to be's. Right. So in that sense, I do think that there is a morality and that it exists in a sort of objective sense, although it's still not completely, clearly defined. It's a bit fuzzy, but there's still something there. Right. So I don't believe in complete moral relativism. I don't believe in complete moral absolutism because there's several different values that compete amongst themselves, and how exactly to do the trade-offs between them is not entirely clear. For the main value, as an example, for me is enjoyment, right? So to me, it's important to maximize enjoyment. But then the question is, how do you individually do it? For instance, if you can increase enjoyment in lots of people, but that will decrease enjoyment a bit in some other people, how, is that a good thing or is it not a good thing? That is, to me, there is no clear answer to that. So for me, as long as you're increasing enjoyment and not decreasing anyone else's enjoyment, and not taking into account the other factors, because there's some other values as well that I sort of consider important too, but just taking into account enjoyment, if you just increase enjoyment and don't decrease anyone else's, then that is objectively good. Okay, so to me, there are some things that are objectively good and in sort of absolute moral sense, but then when there's a trade-off, and often there is a trade-off, then there's no longer is a quite objective trade-off, depending on what the trade-off is. Sometimes there still is an objective right and wrong. So for instance, if you're going to make one person suffer extremely to make a few other people just have a bit more or to make even a lot of people.
I think about a lot of these same things.
Oh, you do? So how about that? Do you agree with me? Because I know lots of people who care about enjoyment, the people who call themselves utilitarians, the standard version is just to maximize total enjoyment. So they would be okay with making one person suffer extremely to make a very large number of people just experience slightly more enjoyment, right? So they'd be okay with torturing one person to make lots of other people just feel a bit extra happiness, right? And I think that is clearly wrong. I think that is clearly the wrong thing to do, and not doing that is the clearly right thing to do. But then, of course, where is that exactly the cutoff? Because, for instance, if you make one person suffer a little bit, if you just like make one person feel a little bit of pain, you just, oh, that hurt, that actually did hurt a little bit. So, and that made me even suffer maybe a tiny bit. Okay, so, I mean, if that could make a lot of other people feel a bit more happiness, that would have been worthwhile. You see what I mean? But so then where exactly is the cutoff? Because if I hit myself more, then it won't be worthwhile, right? I can hit myself harder. Okay, so I'm not going to hit myself hard enough that really makes me suffer much. But you see what I mean? And that's what I mean by there is no precise objective morality, while at the same time there is an overall approximate objective morality. So that's my position. So that would be, again, that would be interesting to me if you could just give me an example so I can just do this. So if there is something like precisely that you think would violate that principle, is there like a belief that you have, like a normative belief in terms of like what should be, right? And thus a moral belief. Is there a belief like that of yours that you think would violate that principle that then I might be able to criticize? But it would also be interesting maybe for you, because then you could think about it and ask yourself, well, is this actually something that I was right about? Or, I mean, from your perspective, so is this something that you were right about? Or And I think that could be interesting. But again, regarding the joining the religion, note that I don't consider my thing a
There's
religion.
a scene in the film Anthiron that I love where
I-
Chitty is asked a loaded question and Chitty answers hypothetical question and the crowd just gets it.
Okay. I don't actually get. I haven't seen that movie. I don't even know that movie. So I'm sorry, and I'm not really sure what exactly you're referring to.
What I mean is,
Do you think I'm asking you a loaded question? A loaded question is when you're making assumptions that assume certain things about
I
the other.
get caught up in my mind a lot.
Okay. Like, I don't think I've been doing a loaded questions. That's not my style. I always try to be honest in my my argumentation and reasoning, and not try to commit any fallacies. And the loaded question basically is a fallacy. Loaded question would be like, why did you kill someone? The loading is you implied that somebody is killed, that you killed someone. I think why is the easiest way to make a question loaded, right? That would be a loaded question. You're implying something that isn't true, or that at least we don't know is
You
true.
haven't been loading questions. I just mean, the universe is more complicated than we can understand maybe.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. Is it more complex? So it certainly is more complicated than we know, right? Because there's still stuff that we haven't discovered. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting question as to whether the universe can be fully understood or not. I don't know. I'm agnostic on that issue. That is sort of a pretty deep question. Maybe. Yeah. But anyway, for now, the point is that I do think that nonetheless there are lots of things that we can understand, and lots of fundamental things that we can understand, even if there are also some things that we can't understand. And so from that, this is just sort of what I've been saying. So and from that perspective, and I think that's the thing. I think that I actually have understood certain things that nobody else has, or at least that nobody else famous has, nobody else that has a wide audience has understood. In fact, some of the things I think I've understood, I've based on other not very well-known people. But yeah, I think I've some basic questions. For instance, one of the very basic things that was one of my very initial things I posted on YouTube is, I think did I post that on YouTube? Yeah, it's about infinity, right? Is that I think that infinity is an impossible concept, and that seems to be a thing that isn't actually widely recognized currently. And to me, infinity is actually like, it's not just impossible physically, but like metaphysically impossible. Is that in no conceivable, imaginable, imaginary world could there be any kind of infinity, which means that the world cannot be infinitely big in space, or have an infinitely large amount of things, or a large amount of matter or energy or whatever. It cannot be infinite in time. It cannot last for an infinite duration. And likewise, there can't be infinite smallness either. So you can't keep dividing stuff into infinitely smaller bits either. So I do think that there is an ultimate minimum size of things, and in fact that appears to be even the case in physics, right? Where there's a Planck time.
Poe and Eureka figured out that the universe must be finite.
Really? Okay. Again, you seem to be more well-read than me. I'm an ignoramus, as unfortunately, because I have this mental block that makes reading hard for me. I can do it, but it's just it's a struggle. I have to kind of reread stuff over and over, and even then I don't remember it well. So I don't mean just reading like the stuff on stream, right? But when it's actually like a book or something, then it's a struggle for me. I used to read better as a kid, in fact. Though this block already also developed very early, but it became stronger and stronger. So as a result, it's actually sort of psychological block, and this is actually something. It's an emotional issue that's ultimately causing this. And because I know that because sometimes I've had a sort of emotional sort of release, partial release, but at the same time that made me feel more emotion, and I could read better. And so I know that in theory, I could actually this could go away, but it would require a major restructuring of my whole, psychological self. So it's not about to happen, or at least not without some sort of, again, extremely unexpected event. So I'll check that out maybe. How did Poe and Eureka figure that out? That the universe was there some sort of actual reasoning to it, or is it just like some sort of poetic kind of thing? I mean, it could be both, of course. But yeah,
let me find it.
Okay. Well, I can probably find it myself. I could just type Poe Eureka. Oh yeah, 40,000. Okay, maybe not at 40,000 words. That's maybe a bit long. I mean, it's long for here. 40,000 words is not that long for me to read, but I mean, it's too long for me to read on stream. Yeah. So, is that something you would agree with? By the way, is that something you would agree with, that the universe is finite, or do you think that there is such a thing as infinity for certain things, or do you simply not have an opinion, or do you think that one simply cannot know? Like, do you think, like, that's the other thing, that there are actually two types of sort of agnostic on an issue, right? Is some people say, I don't know, but one could potentially know, and other people think that it's not possible to know. So in that sense, they're actually not agnostic on the issue of whether or not you can know, right? In that sense, they actually do have a hard opinion.
Olbers's paradox. Poe and Eureka argued against it.
Let's have a look. Olbers' paradox. In cosmology, paradox relating to the problem of why the sky is not dark at night. If the universe is endless and uniformly populated with luminous stars, then every line of sight must eventually terminate at the surface of the star. That is yeah, that's a thing I've actually heard about. But the thing is, I think what people are saying is that doesn't actually necessarily hold because of some reason. I don't know. Let's see what. Yeah. Okay, so what do they say? So I'm just reading this right now. Oh yeah, so they say it's a dynamic universe. They're saying it's because of like redshift or something, and yeah, and also because it's not infinitely old. Right. So that's the current explanation. Oh yeah, the finite size resolves the paradox. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely heard of this. I just didn't remember the name. Oh yeah, so then they say there's a new paradox of the Big Bang Theory. So yeah, so there is all this stuff. So yeah, that's definitely interesting as well. I wasn't even talking about that, right? I was talking about even just from a metaphysical sense, in the sense of in any conceivable universe, not even in ours, right? Because both that just addresses our actual universe, but it doesn't address theoretical different worlds, right? And so what I'm saying is that it's not possible, and my argument is a statistical one. And the statistical argument is basically that basically everything compared to infinity is zero, which means that then you look at it from a statistics probability. What is the probability of having this particular thing? What is the probability of me being this particular person? And if there's an infinite amount, then it becomes zero. What is the probability of existing at this particular moment? And then again, it becomes zero. So that's kind of the statistical argument against an infinite universe, like in any conceivable, imaginable world. So that is my argument. I find it compelling.
Guessing that I'm gonna be here in a few seconds.
Yeah. Guessing that you're... Well, yeah, I guess...
Hope I'm still here.
Yeah. Yeah, well, again, you never know for sure. But my point is that in an infinite... Do you sort of see what I mean? Like, anything finite compared to infinity is infinitely small, so it's 0. And so that means that it just turns everything into nothing. That's basically the way to see it. But I guess ultimately it's a kind of intuitive thing where just you kind of see the sort of absurdity of an infinity. You know, you try to progress. And you
There
imagine
can't
going,
be other universes. Universes include all that exists, which means us too.
Well, yeah, that's a definition. Some people use universe to mean, you know, our quote universe, but it's true that universe, the sort of original definition of universe, does just mean everything that exists. But then you have to invent new terms to mean, like, you know, this specific. I don't even recall the term, but like this subset or something. But that's why instead often people say this universe, and then they say like other universes and like multiverse and all that. But it's true that technically, in a way, universe just means everything. Yeah.
This is the only one I've experienced.
Yeah, well, of course. Well, I guess, and in one of the sort of definitions would be that the universe is everything that exists that you could possibly be aware of, right? And so maybe there are other universes, but they're just completely separate from us. And so in that sense, you could almost say it's a different universe, but maybe not really. Then it's just a question of semantics. It's a question of definition. But still, I returning to what I've been saying. So like I said, I do think there is an absolute morality, and like an absolute morality, but that isn't quite clearly defined. And I do think that morality would hold in any imaginable metaphysical world, including, you know, ones that don't actually exist. And so again, returning to what I have a mission here. There's a purpose again for my stream here. So if you can try to do it again. Do you, presumably, I'm going to presume that you do have normative beliefs, that you have beliefs of what ought to be, right? That you have thus moral beliefs. To me, morality is more or less not even more or less. To me, it's that kind of equivalent. To me, normativity and morality is the same. Ultimately, it's like if something should be, then that means it's moral. If something shouldn't be, then it's immoral. So presumably, you do think that some things ought to be and some things ought to not be. And so that's what I'm getting at. So is there like anything controversial that you think ought to be? Like, are there any things that you think ought to be? Which means that are there any things that
I have preferences, yeah.
Yeah, you have preference. But do you think then those preferences are objective? Like, for instance, I think it's objectively, I don't consider it just a personal preference. So like, what I consider personal preference is like my taste in food. Like, I don't like cheese. I consider that a personal preference, but I don't consider eating cheese to be objectively wrong. See? But I do consider, on the other hand, that my eating cheese is objectively wrong because it causes suffering in me, right? But I don't consider other people eating cheese. If they like it, then that's not wrong. In fact, it's right. It's good because it brings them enjoyment. So I consider it objectively wrong to just torture people for no other reason and for no ulterior purpose, right? Because it just causes suffering. So, for instance, that is a normative belief of mine. So if you, for instance, think that it is okay to just torture people, or not just people, but like other beings, like just like other animals, if you think it's okay to torture them without any other ulterior motive, like if you're doing it for like research or something, okay, or if it's out of punishment to avoid like future crime or something, then okay. But if it's just for its own sake, then that is wrong. And presumably most people would agree, but I know that there are a few people who would like typically be dubbed psychopaths who wouldn't agree with that. So then my question is, do you have any such beliefs that...
I like cheese, but maybe vegans are better.
Right, okay, so I wasn't even going there. I wasn't even looking into like the aspect of how that could make indirectly could make others suffer, right? I'm just not even, I wasn't even presuming that aspect from you. It was just from the taste
I am against
aspect.
torture like that.
Yeah, okay, well, good. That's probably most people. How
And
about...
I know some people aren't, so I was following.
Yeah. Okay, well, good. Except that in this case, it's actually not. In this case, it actually doesn't satisfy me precisely. I'm looking for something so that I can do my thing. Also, because I'm getting a bit tired and a bit hungry, in fact. And so let's think about it. Is there something that is there some sort of, like you said, you're against torture, right? So that's clearly like a normative moral belief, right? That's clearly a moral belief. So is there a moral belief that you have where you're like against or for something that most people would disagree with, like a stance that most people would disagree with, or more importantly, a stance that I would disagree with, if you have any sort of idea of what I would disagree with? That's sort of what I'm looking for right now, right here. If you can find something like that. So for instance, a classic idea is that it's okay to like
well, I don't know, you're not sure how I can come up with that.
Well, just based on what most people, I mean, you've come here before. I recall you've come here before, so in that sense, you might remember a few things. But otherwise, let's see. What can we come up with? Well, okay, like for instance, a classic is the quote libertarian position that, it's wrong to actively harm someone at all in any way, even if it causes a lot of benefit to other people. So there are all sorts of really weird extreme examples of that. So they'll basically say that it's wrong to take a bit of money from a rich person to feed a starving person who would die if you didn't feed that person, right? So that is the classic libertarian, which I don't like calling it libertarianism, so I just call it libism, which could obviously could confuse people by make it sound like like lib in the sense that they use for sort of more like lefty people, but I call it libism. So because I don't think it actually has to do with liberty. Libertarians don't actually aim to increase people's freedom.
Hypothetical question.
Yeah. So yeah. What do you think about that question? Is it okay for the government to take away money from a rich person to feed poor people? Because basically libertarians think no. I mean, or not libertarians, but libists rather. I think I'm more libertarian than
situation that I won't be posed with.
Situation that you won't be posed. Well, yeah, okay. So in practice, you won't have to decide. But if you did, and you might have to, right? I mean, that's not even necessarily true because you might have to vote on the issue, right? You could have there could be a vote, and you'd have to like vote on the question: should we tax rich people to feed poor people or not? So in that sense, you very much are actually faced with such a situation. So that's an interesting. So that's a sort of a classic question, and I know there are lots of people that would disagree with my position and thinks that you shouldn't.
Votes are hypotheses at best.
Well, they're not hypotheses. I mean, how are they hypotheses? They're policies, right? I mean, you could say that right now you're voting on a hypothetical vote because there's no actual vote on that particular question. So in that sense, it's a hypothesis, but it is the kind of thing
votes aren't policies.
Well, they get translated into policy. You have a vote that is when the majority vote. I'm talking more in the vote in the sense of when you vote directly on the issue, like you do, like in Switzerland, right? Where you're not just voting for the candidate, but you're voting for an actual question, like should we raise taxes to pay for this thing, right? That's sort of what I was getting at. But of course, even if you're voting for a candidate, you're going to be voting for a candidate that has a particular platform, and that might include such a question, right? So in fact, that isn't, that's a typical question, like should we raise taxes to help the poor more or not? That's a pretty common part of a platform. It's a pretty common question that people are gonna care about a candidate, right? So that is kind of the issue there. But do you not recall? I almost get the impression from what you were writing that you don't recall.
I wish people on ballots even talked about what they thought as much as you have.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I think that's worded a bit weirdly, but I think what you mean is that you wish that people who, oh yeah, no, okay, yeah, no, I get it. No, yeah, no, I was misinterpreting. Sorry. Yeah, so what you mean is that like the candidates that you vote for, like candidates for office, you wish that they talked about their policy positions. To be fair, if you actually go on people who are getting voted in for office, they often have like pretty detailed policy platforms. It's just that then that doesn't get talked about that much in the media, and then just the media just focuses on just completely silly fluff issues instead of the actual policy positions. But I've often found that if you just go on the candidate's site, they will often have often fairly detailed platform. So I'm not necessarily holding that.
And sometimes the candidates have never seen it.
But it's true that some candidates are definitely don't describe enough in detail their policy positions. That's definitely a valid criticism. But I would counter that, of course, the things that perhaps a bigger criticism that I would have is that the voters don't care enough. But of course, then the issue is that there's so many different candidates. It's hard. And that's why I kind of I'm not such a fan of electoralism, right? It's because you have to research the policy position of every candidate. It's a lot of work because not only do you have to first make an opinion on what is the right choice on each policy issue, and then you have to look at what position each candidate has. It's a lot of work. Which is why I kind of prefer, for main issues, I like direct votation, as I say, like they do in Switzerland, where you just vote directly on the issue. Obviously, for lots of stuff, you can't do that because there's just too much to vote on. But then for that kind of stuff, you're not going to know what your candidate is going to vote on either, because it's precisely then it would be too much stuff and you couldn't learn it all. So again, that's kind of interesting, right? In as much as there's no real perfect political governance system. And of course, in any kind of voting, whether directly on an issue or on a candidate, then there's the other issue, which is that your vote is almost certain to make no difference, right? And so you might as well not vote. And that's like rational apathy. And it's true, like, why bother to vote when it's almost certain that your vote will make no difference? So yeah, and those are good questions. Yeah. So I basically still settle on this idea of having popular votation, like in Switzerland, as the top level of decision making. But it's true that there are problems with that. And well, if you have a smaller group, then there is a higher probability of your vote making a difference. So there'll be less rational apathy as a result. And so an argument could be made for having a system like that instead. Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, I gotta say that it actually is kind of nice chatting with, again, a person who's sort of more, who's sort of willing to do back and forth.
I'm from USA. In some states like mine, there are direct elections on issues.
Yeah, I know. I'm also in California. I'm also registered in California, so I also get to do the same in California. But it's true that the Swiss model is still the I mean, the California model is pretty similar, but it's not at the topmost sovereign level. And it does seem to work a bit better in Switzerland. Like the issues that get voted on are more pertinent, more interesting issues.
AWA here, to know the Swiss model.
Well, it's pretty similar. Like people just gather signatures. People just gather signatures, and if there are enough signatures, then it gets put to the vote. It's the same. It's the same in the USA states. It's that, I mean, that's the obvious way to do it, right? And it's not really any different in Switzerland. It's just that in Switzerland it's at the federal level, right? That's why I mentioned Switzerland, and also because I'm partly from Switzerland, and like I said, because I do feel that the issues that get voted on in Switzerland are they're kind of better somehow. Like it's hard to explain how, but it just feels like more pertinent questions. So yeah. Okay. Well, what do you think about that? Do you and so they're not direct elections, right? They're direct votations, which isn't really a word, but actually it is. There isn't another word, so I use it like that. Direct voting, you could say. Do you think that's a good policy? I mean, I think the people who do have that are usually in favor, and I know lots of people who don't have it like it, but I know there are quite a few people who don't like it either, because they think it's like a vehicle for special interest groups and stuff. Do you have an opinion? Do you have an opinion on that, on direct voting on issues? Is that something that you think is good, or would you think it would be better to just get rid of that? Or do you think it would be better to expand it? Like, do you think it would be better in the USA to have that at the federal level? Like, I obviously support it, so I think it would be better to have it at the federal level. But I do acknowledge, of course, that there are problems. Like, for instance, that people get swayed too much by the media. But I think that, I mean, in Switzerland, we've seen that sometimes there have been like these votations where people they'll go against what the media was recommending them to do. So, and like there was a clear consensus.
When I put a ballot in a box, I feel like I don't know how it would count or not.
Yeah, so that's the rational apathy issue, right? But that's the same when you vote for a candidate. It's like it's not any different between when you vote on an issue versus when you vote for a candidate. That's just the general voting thing. So that's why some people instead advocate for sortition of representatives, or sortition of legislators, where you just anybody who wants to be a legislator just puts their name in the lottery, and then they're just there's a draw, and then there's just a few people that get picked. And I definitely am quite in favor of that overall for legislators. But I still like having direct votation above that can override that in case the randomly selected people happen to be particularly bad. Again, of course, I wouldn't do it just one person, right? You'd have a group, so you have a sample, and normally it should be quite representative, right? But sometimes you could have a very unrepresentative sample, and that's kind of the issue with what I consider is the kind of the biggest flaw with that model, right? But yeah, that's an interesting issue. But so I actually initially, for a long time, for like 2 years, I'd kept it for a bit more 2 years, I think. My policy was that for a legislature, the only way of choosing the legislators is through sortition, through just drawing people randomly. And then I realized that, well, there is that problem, and there is this general problem of it being a bit unrepresentative, potentially. So which is why, in the end, I did end up selecting election. And there is, for instance, the issue that different groups might not be able to speak as well. So like immigrants might not be able to speak as well in the legislature, and so they wouldn't be able to represent themselves as well. And so for that reason, I've finally ended up again considering election acceptable. So yeah, that's interesting. So I've gone back on that, and which is good, because it means that my policies that I would absolutely impose I have less policies that are different from now that I would impose. That's good. Okay. Look, I'm really this is I find it actually tiring to speak. I've already done it quite a lot. I already talked I talked more with other people before. So I'm actually gonna stop. I'm really feeling pretty drained and especially like kind of hungry also at the same time and sweaty. So yeah, it really is an effort. I'm really seeing how it's an effort for me to just talk like this. I feel like I've done a workout.
Have a good sleep.
Thanks. All right. So thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
And although again, like I said, I've said those harsh things to you, so I kind of at the same time keep that in mind. I'm still keeping the sort of distance with the people that come here. So that's that. But okay. Thank you and good night. And maybe